For those of you interested in playing with Terial magic and creating some three-dimensional petals coming off of your flowers, here's a few things that you're going to need to find. Fabric that will basically match or complement your flowers to create extra petals. Look for something that's in similar tones, doesn't have to be exact, but something that's going to look like it's really a part of your flower. Of course, you're going to need the lovely Terial Magic spray. This is fantastic stuff. And then, having a little bowl and paper towel handy is good for just sort of cleaning up in case you get a little overzealous. A lot of times I'll actually take my spray and my fabric outside, especially on a beautiful sunny day like today, because it'll take a lot less time for the fabric to dry as well. First things first, we're just going to cut a piece of this fabric, probably about this size, so that I have plenty of room to cut a few petals. I don't need to do a ton, but basically give yourself a good healthy size fabric so that you can play and create and shape some petals. You won't have to worry if there's any wrinkles or creases in the fabric that you've chosen to treat, because we're about to make it very much saturated with the spray. What I like to do is basically create a little scrunchie with a well in the center of my fabric. Then I will fill that well with the Terial Magic and then start squeezing and working that spray out into the different fibers. Your goal is to get this completely saturated, which is actually pretty easy to tell, especially if you're working on a batik, because you'll be able to see the areas that haven't been activated yet with the moisture. So just continue spraying and spreading, getting it nice and damp. And once you have completely saturated your fabric, you're going to leave it in a place to air dry for about, it depends on your weather. In a nice sunny summer day, it might only take a few minutes, especially if you put it outside. In the wintertime, it can take closer to 10 to 15 minutes. We basically want to let this dry until it's just damp. Not really wet anymore, but just slightly damp to the touch. All right, so I let this go outside for just a couple of minutes on this nice hot sunny day. It's just barely damp. I'm going to take a nice hot iron and then just iron across here. And you will see as the heat hits it, eventually it's going to completely change the hand of the fabric, and it's going to stiffen up and start actually even curling up off the surface. Terial Magic is so much fun to use. It's a great stabilizer for specialty fabrics that you're trying to work with, even like t-shirts or cheesecloth or other items that can sometimes be very difficult to work with. This will make it behave beautifully. It'll also stiffen it up enough that you can actually cut an 8.5 by 11 piece of fabric and send it directly through your printer, which is also a really fun technique. The best thing about it, however, is that once you have treated your fabric with Terial Magic, you cannot scorch your fabric. It's not like starch that way. You can sit here and iron and press to your heart's content, and you are not going to scorch your fabric. It has a protective layer on it now. So now, this fabric is nice and stiff. The fun thing about it is you can even shape it by twirling it, pleating it. You can take a curling iron to it and create curls. But at this point, our fabric is now ready to create some extra petals to go with our piece. So we have our fabric that's been stiffened with the Terial Magic. We have our flowers. So the idea here is we're just going to create a few extra petals. Now, you don't have to worry about knowing exactly what petal shape you want. You can just do a little bit of a initial cut of a kind of a funny little amoeba, and then start seeing how that petal might work on the flower. Now obviously this is way too big for this particular flower, so I'm going to trim him down. And then see how that might fit. And actually I'm liking that a little bit better, especially if I sneak it in here into the center. Now I'm not going to worry about covering my center as of yet, which is to add a new center to the flower. If you don't have any fabric that you like as much as you like the center of this flower, you certainly could trim away this petal here so that that center still shows. And the idea here is that it's going to be stitched down, and then we're going to shape it so that that petal will stick up and off of the flower. To hold it in its place, you could use a pin, or you could just simply use a little bit of a glue stick on a couple of points to hold it in its position until you're happy with where it goes. A little bit of glue stick and then a hot iron is actually a really very good and easy way to adhere something and still be able to manipulate it if you need to. The fun thing with the Terial magic, because again you can shape it, is once we have that petal on there, especially once it's stitched, we can really have some fun bending and shaping that petal into place. And if you don't like the shape of the petal, you can still alter it. Because it is treated with the Terial magic, these edges are not going to fray like fabric would normally do either, which is a lovely thing. So again, we just continue playing, adding petals to our flowers. And maybe this one folds over a little bit. So he'll be a bit like that. Again, if I just want him to kind of hold his place for now, I'm just going to put a little dab of glue underneath there and hold him down. Now it's easy to go overboard on adding a whole bunch of extra petals. Remember, we're just here to enhance it a little bit. We don't need to do a ton, but feel free to overdo it and then decide which petals actually need to stay. It's much easier to take away before you've stitched. After you've stitched, it's not as easy. So another option would be to fold a petal, to stitch it down this way and then fold it over this direction. Again, this one's way too big currently, but we can fix that. I like the size of that, and the shape isn't too bad either. I might create just a little bit of a triangle in the center there to make it easier for me to bend that petal in on itself. And then we can have some fun shaping it. When I go to stitch this down, I'm going to stitch it here first. Then I'll bend it back and shape it, and probably add a few more stitches on the top to hold it more in place.